It is a serious thing. Actually, he tried to deceased after the war, and he tried
writing obscene letters to strange women whose names he plucked from the
classified section newspaper.
The contents included a left human foot, slicing her breasts from her body. At first, the body, his entire living room, stained with blood. He takes each piece of her he adored, like the organs and the head, and places the parts, including her torso and thighs, on fine china plates. Similarly to Issei Sagawa, Sumanto had this belief that consuming the dead brought him supernatural powers, brought him everlasting peace. He sort of believed in black magic.
Real black magic spells to make someone obsessed with you. Oh my god. These spells are requested. These spells are requested all the time.
He had aimed to eat at least 7 humans to gain special powers. Sumanto was a 31-year-old Indonesian man arrested in 2003 for quite literally digging up the body of an 80-year-old woman and eating her dead body. See, now we've heard of people that eat people just after death, or even eat people during death, but this man took it a step further and pulled already decaying corpses out of the ground. He actually got caught and went to trial for it. He admitted to eating 2 other people. Like, he was trying to collect the infinity stones, but it was like, instead of the stones, he was just eating people. He also admitted to cutting off the... Okay, we're gonna jump right into these things, so if you haven't seen any of this stuff, I'm warning you. It's just, I'm just gonna say the stuff, and then if we get age restricted, we're gonna have to deal with that after the fact. He also admitted to cutting off the penis of one of his victims, and then he dried it. I'm not really sure how he dried it. I think, dried it up in the sun, turned it into a little raisin, just like a little penis raisin. Just had it like, anyways, he carries it around as an amulet. He wears it, so there's that. And you wouldn't get this from the guy. He looks happy in these photos, but ultimately he's crazy. Behind that gentle smile is an evil penis amulet wearing man. This isn't even the crazy part of the story. So he's sentenced to 5 years in prison. He gets out, right? We jump to 2018. So Purbalingga is like a section of Central Java, which is a residency in Indonesia. So Purbalingga holds this, chased by Sumanto. Like running of the bulls, or like those British people where they chase the cheese down the hill. But instead, they use a real life cannibal in a race where Sumanto chases tourists as if he's going to eat them. I don't know if he actually does eat them. Essentially, the idea is for him to scare you. The race turns out to be a huge success, and they plan on holding similar events featuring this man again in the future. Now, I guess he didn't really murder anybody. It's not really murder. It's just kind of, I don't know. It's just straight up cannibalism, which is illegal in Indonesia, I guess. But so I guess he's not really that bad compared to some of these others. Scotland's most famous cannibal, Sawney Bean, had this clan, the Bean clan. Essentially, it was his family. Not really all his family, but sort of a cult. The family cannibalized over 1,000 people over the span of 25 years. Hold on, let me do some more math. I don't know why I'm doing math on this. Alright, so that's like 0.1 people a day. Come on, that's gotta be some kind of record. But there's a lot of them, so they really know how to conserve their meat, huh? So Mr. Bean and his wife, Mr. Bean and his wife lived in Banan Cave. So their whole family essentially lived in an actual cave, and they would go around robbing travelers as a means of survival. In order to not be caught for his crimes and for people to find out where he's at, he wants to start murdering these people that he has robbed. And while he's at it, he's not leaving anything left on the table. After he decides to start murdering these people, he comes up with the idea to start eating the bodies to serve as a high-protein diet for his family. So Sonny Bean and his wife have 14 beanie babies, and the only thing that they ever fed their children was the human bodies of the people that they murdered. And you know, being cannibals, living in a cave, there wasn't a whole lot of, you know, they didn't have Tinder, there wasn't no online dating, so they kind of raised their children through incest and just kept reproducing more people that had that flesh craving in them. You know, cannibalism became hereditary. So after this span of creating all these man-eating children, body parts began washing up on local beaches, and this large list of missing persons was growing by the day, but no one seemed to search the cave. Years went by and the family grew up. You know, when you grow up, you want more food, you need more calories, so more people were dying. More people fell victim to the Beanie Bunch. Even in the best planned operations, however, things sometimes go wrong. It happened one evening for the Sonny Bean Army, when they attacked a man and his wife as they were returning home from a nearby fair. One group pulled the woman from her horse and had her stripped and disemboweled before the other group had a chance to wrestle the man to the ground. Realizing the fate that was about to fall him, he fought desperately to escape, driving his horse into and over his attackers. As he fought for his life, a group of 20 or so people also returning from the fair happened upon the scene. After a brief and violent exchange, the Sonny Bean Army found itself for the first time ever as a numerical disadvantage and promptly retreated back to the cave to consider the situation. As they retreated, they left behind the mutilated body of a woman as evidence. King James VI heard of the attack and led a search of 400 men accompanied by attack dogs. Though the family had been hidden safely in the caves before, this time the attack dogs picked up their scent, and you know, they got all these decaying bodies in their cave, like just hanging around. So I mean, the dogs had to smell something. Nothing could prepare them for the sight they witnessed that day. The damp walls of the cave were strewn row upon row of human limbs and body parts, like meat hanging in a butcher's shop. Other areas of the cave stored bundles of clothing, piles of watches and rings, and heaps of discarded bones from previous feasts. 48 members of the Sonny Bean clan were marched to Edinburgh. The entire family was sentenced to death. The following day, the 27 men of the family met a fate similar to that of many of their victims, by having their legs and arms cut off and being left to slowly bleed to death. Watched by their women, the 21 women were burned like witches. And Sonny Bean's the actual inspiration for Hannibal Lecter.
Why not fight for your life?
I just don't care to.
Are you sorry?
For the victim?
Yes.
Yes.
Are you? Anyone in particular?
Especially the one that was the 11-year-old girl way back in 1967.
The Drunk Cannibal. Born in Sioux City, Iowa. That's way too close to home. Later moved to California with his family. Grew up with a physically and emotionally abusive mother. She would force him to wear dresses. He was often teased for having a girl's name. Essentially wanted a daughter. She got a son. She would do everything to try and convince him that he was a girl. Starts out very early as a murderer. Often you see people harming animals or doing strange things with their friends, but at age 8, he actually drowned his first victim, a bully who had been making fun of him. But he essentially got out of this because the death was ruled an accident, which later would be admitted to as an actual murder in Cole's autobiography. As a teen, he committed petty crimes and was frequently arrested for robbery and public intoxication. Goes on to join the army, but is discharged for bad conduct and stealing pistols. In 1960, he attacked a couple in Lover's Lane. Cole would often call the police in Richmond, California, and tell them about his fantasies of strangling women. He knew he had issues, so he would end up in several mental hospitals and ultimately was diagnosed with antisocial personality disorder. Nonetheless, he proceeds throughout life, gets married to a stripper named Billy Whitworth. He accuses his wife of cheating and burns down her house. He gets charged with arson. When they finally let him out, he moves on to his second victim, strangling an 11-year-old in Missouri. He's only sentenced to 5 years. When he's released again, he attempted to strangle 2 more women in Nevada. Third victim, Essie L. Buck, strangled and dumped her body. 2 weeks later, he killed an unidentified woman and buried her body in the woods. Claimed that these women were unfaithful to their husbands and reminded him of his adulterous mother. Essentially, when Carroll Edward Cole was a child, his father was in the military, and while his father was away, his mother would take him along to some of these play dates that she would have with other men, basically leaving him in the car, leaving him to go do something in the other room while she... In 1973, he married Diana Faye Younglove Paschal. They would often fight, and Cole would go off and kill people out of rage. This is when the cannibalism allegedly began. 1977, Cole met a woman at a topless bar and agreed to spend the night with her. Woke to find the woman dead in his bathtub, and remnants of her feet and arm in his refrigerator. Her buttocks was found in a skillet on the stove. The body was collected and dumped into the city dump. And this is all from his mouth. So, this is what he claims. Basically saying he didn't do it. In 1979, he strangled his wife to death and hid her body in a closet, and it was discovered 8 days later. Police had assumed she drank herself to death. So, all throughout Carroll Edward Cole's life, he is getting off for everything. There's a clear line of a troubled past and a history of bodies, but no one suspects him. And he continues his rampage, his drunk frenzy of murdering people. He meets Marie Cushman in Las Vegas, and he has sex with her and strangles her in the motel. Then he moves on to Dallas, fatally strangling 3 more women in November of 1980. 3 victims in 1 month. He gets arrested for one of these. Police were about to rule that his victim died of natural causes when finally he confessed to his crimes. At this point, it seemed that the police didn't want to arrest this man. He was done with getting away with it. If they weren't going to help him, he was going to have to help himself. Cole claimed that he had murdered at least 14 women over the previous 9 years. I guess that's one way to get a confession, is to just wait for him to finally, come to terms with how many people he's killed. He's like, okay, I got 14 in the bag. I think I'm out of the game, guys. Although he added that there may have been more, and he couldn't remember exactly. As his title states, he's usually drunk when he committed his crimes. April 9th, 1981, Cole was convicted of the 3 murders he committed in Texas. He was sentenced to life at the Huntsville prison. Carroll Edward Cole's mother passed away in 1984, and his attitude shifted drastically. He agreed to face further murder charges for his Nevada victims, even though it may mean the death penalty. When Carroll Edward Cole was sentenced to death, he simply replied, "Thanks, Judge." On December 6th, 1985, Carroll Edward Cole was executed by lethal injection at the Nevada State Prison. Antron Singleton, aka Big Lurch, was a 6'7" rapper who liked to rap about serial killers like Hannibal Lecter, Freddy Krueger, and Jason Voorhees. Born in East Dallas, Texas in 1976, Big Lurch started getting big in the rap game in the 90s. Right around 2002, Lurch was hit by a drunk driver and broke his neck, causing him to turn to the street drug PCP for pain relief. He would stay high for weeks. Rarely would he eat. This would cause him to grow delusional and have hallucinations. He thought the devil was inside the stomach of his roommate, Tanisha Isais. One day he attacks Tanisha Isais, carves out her stomach, and pulls out her lungs. He then begins to run down the street naked, with her half-eaten lungs in his hands. His entire body was drenched in blood. He awoke from a PCP-induced coma 2 weeks later to find out that he was a murderer and a cannibal. He says he has no recollection of what he had done. Tried to argue insanity, but lost, and now is facing 2 life sentences. Murder and lawsuit. Mark Latunsky. In 2019, Mark Latunsky was arrested for the murder of Kevin Bacon, a 25-year-old hairstylist. Not the Kevin Bacon from Footloose, the different Kevin Bacon. On Christmas Eve, Latunsky invited Kevin over to his house after meeting on the online dating / hookup app Grindr. It was supposed to be a cute little holiday hookup. You know, it was just supposed to be a little holiday get-together, a little wine, dinner, a little bedroom action. The next day, Kevin's family reported him missing. He did not show up for Christmas breakfast at his family's house. For 3 days, volunteer searchers of Swartz Creek, Michigan, searched for Kevin. Kevin's body remained strung up in the basement of Latunsky's cottage. His throat had been slit. This is not Mark Latunsky's first rodeo. On October 10th, 2019, James Carlson, 49, woke up bound with leather straps after meeting up with Latunsky for what he was supposed to be a fun hookup. He escaped the bounds using a butcher's knife and called 911. He wasn't sure if he had been drugged, but declined to press charges. On November 25th, 2019, Latunsky chased a 29-year-old man out of his home while the man called 911, claiming Latunsky was creepy and had tied him up in his basement. Once again, no charges were filed. At first, he kind of went with the whole tied up thing. It was just kind of, you know, he thought that's what it was, that's what they were into, but it went south. And he wasn't into it. On December 27th, 2019, Latunsky answered his door wearing a leather kilt as police questioned him. So he's really into that like BDSM, S&M, just that the leather black. You know what I'm talking about. Just wearing a little sexy leather kilt. When the police searched his home and found Kevin's body, he admitted to his crimes. After being read his rights, he said he planned to use Bacon's blood and bones to fertilize plants on his property. He hoped to use his muscles for jerky. For the time being, Latunsky had fried and eaten his testicles. He was charged with 2 felonies: homicide and mutilation of a dead body. Stanley Dean Baker. Harry Allen Stroup and Stanley Dean Baker were hitchhiking in the summer of 1970 in Great Falls, Montana. James Schlosser, 22, picked up the friends. Stanley Dean Baker shoots James Schlosser in the head, cuts out his heart, and eats it raw. Baker also admits to being on LSD at the time of the attack. He dismembered Schlosser and threw his body into the Yellowstone River. The duo drove Schlosser's car to Big Sur, California, and they were caught in a hit-and-run crash. They took off on foot, and when Baker was caught, he turned to the officer and said, "I have a problem. I am a cannibal." He was chewing on Schlosser's fingers as he admitted this. The pair were arrested. Baker underwent a mental evaluation, and Stroup pleaded innocent. Baker ultimately was sentenced to life in prison, and Stroup was sentenced to 10 years, but released after serving only 2. Hayden Clark. Born in 1952, his parents abused him and his 4 siblings. A lot like Carol Edward Cole, his mother would dress him in girls' clothing and call him Kristen. One of his siblings, Bradfield Clark, killed his girlfriend and admitted to cooking and eating her breasts. He was described as a bully who enjoyed hurting others and killing and torturing animals. You know, the basic tendencies of a psychopath. Hayden Clark becomes a chef and joins the Navy. Never really outgrew some of the things that he went through as a child. He would sometimes wear women's underwear, and in the Navy, his crewmates would beat on him when they found out that he was doing this. He ultimately was medically discharged from the Army when he was diagnosed as a paranoid schizophrenic. He goes to live with his brother Jeff. He was asked to leave the home after masturbating in front of his nieces and nephews. In 1986, before moving out, Hayden answered the door to a 6-year-old girl, Michelle Dorr, who was looking for his niece. He led her to a bedroom, butchered her by knife, and cannibalized her. Hayden got a job as a gardener and crept into the bedroom of the family's daughter, Laura Hofteling. He was dressed in women's clothing when he forced her to undress and take a bath. He duct taped her mouth and caused her to suffocate. He buried her in a shallow grave. His fingerprints were later found on a pillowcase soaked in Laura's blood that Clark had kept as a souvenir. Sentenced to 30 years in prison, did not plead insanity. He often bragged about murdering people in prison. including the little girl Michelle Dorr. He was sentenced to an additional 30 years. While in prison, Clark believed a prisoner with long hair was Jesus and began confessing all of his murders to him. This led police to discovering a bucket of jewelry on his grandmother's property, supposedly belongings to all of his victims. He claimed to have murdered at least a dozen women in 1970s. Ugolino and his sons, Count Ugolino della Herradesca, was a tyrant who ruled in the 12th century Pisa. It's said that Dante damned Ugolino to a prison of ice in the second ring of the lowest level of Dante's Inferno. However, in real life, he was imprisoned with his 4 sons and was forced to eat all of them. In the 1860s, Jean-Baptiste Carpeaux created a sculpture depicting Ugolino and his son. The 4 children are in different states of suffering, and they beg their father to eat them such that he can stay alive. The oldest boy seems more energetic. He has his fingers in the flesh of Ugolino's leg to emphasize his begging. The second oldest son on the right is also holding his father in both hands. The second youngest son on the left sits on top of his oldest brother and has already lost most of his remaining energy. He has his left arm on his father's leg. The youngest son is on the bottom right, and while he's the only one with a peaceful expression, he already appears as if he's dead. Gough's Cave. Gough's Cave is located in Somerset, England. Right around 14,700 years ago, Ice Age Britons were eating each other as a part of a ritual. Prehistoric human remains, including those of a teenager and a 3-year-old, have been discovered and show clear signs of prehistoric cannibalism, such as human teeth markings in the bones. The skulls were cut to use as cups and bowls. Due to the zigzag patterns meticulously carved in the bones on one of these remains, it is believed that the cannibalistic matters were part of some sort of ancient ritual. Jamestown, 1609. A harsh winter for the settlers of Virginia's Jamestown colony. The colony was founded in 1607 by 104 settlers aboard 3 ships, the Susan Constant, Discovery, and Godspeed, but only 38 survived the first 9 months of life in Jamestown, with most succumbing to starvation and disease. This was the cost to pay for colonization, troubles that they were not prepared to face. The body of a 14-year-old girl was cannibalized, and hundreds of years later, her skeleton was analyzed using modern technology. According to one researcher, the cut marks on the jaw, face, and forehead of the skull, along with those on the shin bone, are telltale signs of cannibalism. The clear intent was to remove the facial tissue and the brain for consumption. These people were in dire circumstances, so any flesh that was available would have been used. People were dying from eating rats. They had already eaten their own pets, and then now they were moving on to eating pests, but people were dying from eating the pests and becoming even more sick. Ultimately, they turned to cannibalism. Her brain, tongue, cheeks, and leg muscles were eaten, with the brain likely eaten first because it decomposes so quickly after death. It's unknown whether this girl was murdered or if she died of natural causes. No one knows if this is the act of one person or many of them. It's also unknown how many other people fell victims of cannibalism after their death.